Every fall, I take me and my family out to a cabin in the woods up in Maine. Don't let the whole cabin in the woods thing fool you. It's a very bougie kind of experience, and although my kids would roll their eyes at me using that word, I don't think they'd be quite so pleased with the place if it wasn't for how upmarket it actually is. It has a hot tub outside, a full kitchen, pretty spectacular internet for rural Maine, but I think my favorite part has to be the cozy TV area with its fireplace and sliding glass door. The glass doors face out west, and because the cabin is built in a clearing at the crest of a gentle slope, the sunsets are absolutely incredible. Paying for a hot tub is one thing, but seeing the way the setting sun lights up the reddy orange leaves and makes them look like they're on fire, that's something that money can't buy right there. But by some horrid twist of fate, those sliding glass doors ended up being part of one of the scariest things I'd ever seen with my own two eyes. They both protected us and presented us with something so horrifying that I don't think I'll ever get it out of my mind. And every time we visit that luxurious log cabin up in Maine, it pops into my mind at some point, and it's guaranteed to make me shudder. We're going back more than 10 years for this, all the way back to 2010 when my daughter was still in middle school and my son was just only out of diapers. Me and my wife had just put my son to bed, and my daughter was in her room playing the Nintendo thing that we just gotten her for her birthday. So for the first time all that day, me and my wife were just enjoying each other's company in the TV room, watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of wine. We're just gazing out the glass doors, silently basking in the fact that we'd overcome so much to be where we were, when suddenly, a dog comes into view. It looked like a mongrel of sorts, is just lazily wandering into our view before stopping and letting its tongue loll out of its mouth in the way that dogs do. My wife said something like, "Aw, look at that little guy. You think he's lost?" But the dog seems to hear her talk and returns its head in our direction. That's when I noticed that there was something not quite right about it. Its ribs were showing, which made me think it was a stray, but I also noticed those flecks of white spittle around its mouth, some of it matted into the fur at the corners of its jaws. My wife, being the kind-hearted soul that she is, asked if we should maybe give the poor thing some food and a bowl of water, since she too thought that it looked like a stray. She was halfway around to getting up off the couch when I just gently put a hand on her thigh and asked her to sit back down. She acted like I was being some sort of Scrooge, not wanting to feed and water a starving animal. But when I told her that I thought the dog might have rabies, she suddenly understood why I didn't want her opening the glass doors. After she sat back down, I got up to take a closer look at the thing, just to make sure that I wasn't being overly protective or paranoid. But just as I got near the glass, the dog suddenly began baring its teeth and began snarling so loud we could hear it through the thick glass of the sliding doors. I immediately froze in fear, amazed that even though it looked like nothing more than a domesticated dog, its anger could have such a profound effect on me. It looked truly ferocious, like it actually wanted to rip my throat out. And I realized how fortunate we are that most dogs have the friendly disposition that made them man's best friend. Rather than antagonize it any further, I tried to just back off away from the glass doors, intending to find my phone so I could call animal control or something. But then the second I had turned to show my back, it began bounding towards us, something I'd never have known about if it wasn't for my wife shouting, "Oh my God," at the top of her lungs. I turned just in time to see the dog's face colliding with the glass door, and it made such an ungodly thudding sound that it makes my skin crawl just to think about today. The impact drew another frightened cry from my wife, which in turn had my daughter running into the room to see what had caused it. In that moment, my priority was getting my daughter out of the room so that she wouldn't have to see what was happening. It was extremely distressing, even for us grown adults, so I can only imagine how disturbing it must have been for her. Just seeing the slight smear of blood on the glass, and the dog walking in a dazed circle outside while yelping and hacking enough was to cause her to burst into floods of confused, frightened tears. And although I was sorry to do it, I had to yell at her to get her out of the room again. My next priority was obviously animal control, as I was never really afraid that the thing was going to break through the glass, Certainly not after that first attempt, which seemed to have completely stunned the poor thing. But after that, while I dialed an operator and asked them to connect me with local animal control, I watched in horror as the dog tried to literally bite its way through the glass. It was raking its teeth against it, its fat, swollen tongue lolling out the whole time. And that's when I realized that it wasn't so much that it was just hot or thirsty. Its tongue was just so big and swollen to actually sit in its mouth properly. Blood was leaking out of its nostrils from the impact against the glass, with more smearing over it as it continued to try to bite its way inside. It still looked furious, like it would most likely attack us if it did somehow manage to break through, but at the same time, a look would come into its eyes every so often that to me looked so much like desperation that broke my heart. It was like it was silently crying out to us, "Help me, please help me," but there was nothing we could do. I'm not the type to keep a gun in the house, and even if I was, I'm not sure I have the heart to shoot an animal like that, no matter how much it's suffering. All I could do was wait for the animal control officer to call us back, as he wasn't picking up his phone immediately, and then tell him where exactly we were and what condition we'd seen the dog. It had wandered off long before the call came, but my wife had barely managed to calm herself in that time. I can't say that I've done a better job either, as, like I said, the whole thing was one of the single most horrifying things I'd ever been witness to. In the years that followed, my daughter became a huge fan of the TV show The Walking Dead, and I was always surprised that she didn't make the connection between the virus in the show and what she'd seen back at the cabin that day. Naturally, we had to explain to her that the dog was rabid, how dangerous a disease it was, and how she should learn to recognize symptoms of such animals so she could get away from them. Personally, I find it fascinating that people like her take an interest in a fictional zombie apocalypse and talk about it like it's an impossibility. We have a zombie virus here on Earth. It actually exists. Something that can turn animals and maybe people into furious, foam-frothing creatures that can pass on their disease through their bites. We don't have to imagine it. We don't have to invent it. It's real. It's with us. And that one little fact scares the absolute crap out of me.